There's a wound most men never name. Not the pain of rejection, but the quiet confusion of being overlooked when you were certain you carried something more. You've felt it, that invisible weight in the room when you enter, the glance that lingers just long enough to wonder, was that something? Then just as quickly it's gone, and you question yourself, was it presence or projection? Did she feel it, or did you just hope she did? That's where it begins, the invisible shift. Not in her, in you. You start to notice the pattern. People lean in when you speak, but sometimes they flinch when you say nothing. Some admire you, but can't explain why. Others smile, but seem unsettled. You're not louder, you're not trying. And yet, the room changes around you. That's not coincidence, that's resonance. And most men miss it because they've been trained to seek approval. But a magnetic man doesn't ask to be felt. He disturbs without moving, because his gravity doesn't beg, it simply is. Still, you don't fully believe it. You doubt it, bury it. Because charisma, for most men, feels like something others perform. A look, a voice, a costume. But what if real magnetism isn't added? What if it's remembered? What if your presence doesn't need more effort, but less noise? The Stoics knew this. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be one." And that's what true charisma is. Not decoration, but density. A quiet weight that others can't help but respond to. So if you've ever wondered why some people are drawn to you and others feel slightly disarmed in your presence, it's not charm. It's signal. And the real question isn't how do I make more people feel it? The real question is, can I stay grounded when I do? Because magnetism without anchoring becomes performance. But anchored energy that changes everything, and what you're about to discover isn't how to gain it. It's how to stop leaking what was already yours. Quietly, powerfully, unapologetically. There was something you couldn't quite place. She laughed at your joke, but not with her eyes. She leaned in, but her energy stayed just beyond reach. You told yourself it was nothing, timing, mood, distraction. But deep down, your body felt it before your mind could explain it. A shift, not dramatic, just subtle. Like gravity loosening, like music slipping half a beat behind. You were still with her, but the rhythm between you, what once felt natural, was off. So you started adjusting, not with intention but instinct. You toned yourself down, smoothed out the sharp edges of your truth. You became careful about tone, timing, even silence, and still something didn't land. Because the magnetism she once felt wasn't born from strategy, it came from your unfiltered presence. And now what remained wasn't energy, it was performance. The man she once responded to had slipped, not in effort, but in essence. That's the paradox of magnetism. It fades the moment you try to control it. When you begin managing reactions instead of embodying truth, you become noise. Predictable, polished, easy to forget. And she feels it even if she doesn't name it. The pull weakens, the moments stretch. Warmth gives way to formality. And in your effort to reconnect, you over-express, over-offer, unknowingly smothering the very mystery she was once drawn to. A stoic man doesn't panic in the face of that shift. He notices. He doesn't beg for gravity, he returns to it. Because connection that dissolves the moment you stop adjusting was never connection. It was choreography. And the pain you feel isn't from her drifting, it's from realizing you've been drifting too. Away from the quiet, steady core that once held everything in place. And the first step back is no longer pretending that nothing felt off. It never looks like weakness at first. It looks like care, like compromise. You tell yourself you're being thoughtful, adjusting, softening, becoming more in tune. But slowly, quietly, you begin shrinking. You apologize when you've done nothing wrong. You say it's fine when your gut is burning. What began as connection becomes caution, and caution unchecked becomes self-erasure. Not out of fear, but out of a longing to be kept. This is the disguised pattern, the silent habit that fractures your presence. You don't notice it happening because it wears the face of goodness. You smile more, speak less. You say what's pleasing, not what's real. And every time you edit yourself for harmony, you chip away at the gravity that once drew her in. You're still there in form, but your frame, hollowed, because you stopped being a center and started becoming a mirror. Attraction doesn't die when you make a mistake. It dies when you stop being unpredictable. When your energy loses its texture, when you trade stillness for approval. Women don't lose interest because you're not perfect. They lose interest because you've become predictable in pursuit. The tension's gone, the contrast fades, and without contrast, there is no pull, only politeness. A quiet death of magnetism wrapped in good intentions. So ask yourself, not with judgment but with precision, when did I start managing her perception of me instead of expressing the truth of me? That's the pivot. That's where presence begins to leak. And the moment you spot it, the over-agreeing, the forced lightness, the silence that protects comfort instead of clarity, you've seen the pattern. And once seen, you can't unsee it. You can only choose to return, or keep disappearing slowly with a smile. Silence can be terrifying when it's not yours. You hear it after a message goes unanswered, in the pause after you speak your truth, in the space between her retreat and your instinct to chase. But what most men miss is this: silence is not the enemy, it's a mirror. And what it reflects is not her intentions, but your own relationship with absence, with space, with self. It doesn't expose her feelings, it exposes how much of yourself you've handed over to her presence. Psychologically, silence creates tension, and tension held well becomes imprint. It's what makes moments linger long after they end. The Stoics understood this. They didn't rush to fill the void. They let it breathe. Because when a man can be silent, not out of fear, but out of fullness, he becomes rare. Women feel it, not as distance, but as gravity, the kind that doesn't ask to be validated, the kind that holds itself even when no one else is listening. But here's the line: silence from emptiness repels. It feels evasive, cold and certain. It begs for decoding, while silence from presence attracts. It feels grounded, deliberate, alive. A man who disappears into silence weakens the space, but a man who occupies silence commands it. He doesn't use words to prove he's still there. He lets stillness do the speaking, not because he has nothing to say, but because what he is says enough. So the next time you feel the urge to explain, to reassure, to chase, and ask, is this silence uncomfortable because she's unclear, or because I've lost touch with my own clarity? That's the test. And that's the work. Because a Stoic man doesn't just survive in silence, he thrives in it. He doesn't fear the unknown, he becomes known inside it. And that kind of presence, it doesn't just hold her attention, it shapes what she remembers when you've already left the room. You didn't fall for her. You fell for the way she made you feel about yourself, for the version of you that came alive under her attention, seen, amplified, reflected. You mistook her gaze for intimacy, when in truth it was a mirror. And in that mirror you didn't see her. You saw the man you wanted to be. The man who didn't doubt, didn't reach, didn't need. And when the mirror cracked, when her silence came, you weren't mourning her absence. You were mourning the version of yourself you no longer knew how to find. Real intimacy asks for presence, but projection asks for performance. You built her in your mind, a woman of rare understanding, of depth, of unspoken connection. But the truth is, you filled in the gaps she never spoke. You gave her credit for words she never said, meaning she never intended. You weren't in love. You were in longing, a longing so refined it felt spiritual. But longing is not clarity. It's the fog that makes fiction feel like fate. And yet, she wasn't to blame. She never promised the story you wrote. She just stood where your need wanted her to be. That's the danger of attraction without awareness. It blurs boundaries between her reality and your hope. You didn't know her. You knew how you felt in her presence. And that feeling, powerful, validating, intoxicating, wasn't love. It was recognition of something missing inside you, now temporarily filled. The Stoics would say, you suffer not because of what happened, but because of how you judged what happened. You weren't broken by her. You were broken by the collapse of your own illusion. The story no longer held. The mirror no longer reflected. And now the choice is yours. Will you keep chasing reflections? Or will you turn inward and ask the harder question, Who am I when no one is watching me love? Because only there does real presence begin. There's a moment, so subtle, you might not even remember it happening, but it marks everything. It's when you stop being the man she's drawn to and start becoming the man she needs. You tell yourself it's for love, but deep down, you start to feel the shift, the subtle weakening of your boundaries, the small compromises that feel like nothing at first, but eventually shape everything. It doesn't feel like desperation at first. It feels like care. But care becomes need when you start to fear her absence more than losing yourself. You begin to give more, to adjust, to dim your edges just enough so she stays comfortable. The man who once led with confidence now leads with apology. You soften your truth, you edit your needs, you hold back your words. You tell yourself you're being patient, you're just being understanding. But that's when you lose her, not because she left, but because you're no longer the man who stood firm in his own worth. You've become the man who will bend to keep her from walking away. The question begins to form in your mind, but you ignore it, hoping it will vanish. Am I loving her, or am I proving I'm worthy of her love? That's the difference between real attraction and fear-driven performance. Real attraction doesn't need validation. It needs presence. But you've stopped just being present. You're now performing. You're now trying to make her see you, make her choose you, make her stay. And in doing so, you've abandoned the one person who could have anchored her, yourself. A Stoic man understands this. He doesn't seek to earn love. He seeks to be true to himself, no matter the outcome. You cannot control her reactions. You can only control your presence. You don't chase. You don't beg. You don't shrink. Because when you start bending yourself into a shape to be loved, you stop being who you are and become someone she might not even recognize. And this moment, the moment you realize you've given too much of yourself away, is the moment you have to choose stay lost in need or return to who you were meant to be. You can blame her. You can point to the silence, the retreat, the shift in energy. You can tell yourself that it's her fault. But in the quiet of your own mind, you know the truth. The shift began before she ever pulled away. It began the moment you stopped holding your own center. The Stoic mirror doesn't show her behavior. It shows you. It shows you the moment you traded your inner strength for the hope of being needed. The question is no longer, what did she do? It's what did I do to lose myself? Epictetus taught, wealth consists not in having great possessions, but in having few wants. The same can be said about your emotional stability. You didn't lose yourself because she didn't love you enough. You lost yourself when you started needing her to love you more than you loved yourself. The moment you required validation from her presence, her attention, her approval, you gave up the very thing that made you magnetic in the first place, your own internal gravity. And when you give that away, you're left to chase something that was never truly yours. When a man gives up his own peace for another, he loses the most powerful thing he can offer, his presence. Not his performance, not his words, but the quiet certainty that he stands in his own value. Stoicism teaches us that external events cannot dictate our emotional state. We do. When you are controlled by external validation, you are no longer the master of your own emotions. You have handed the keys to your worth to someone else. And it's in that moment that you begin to disappear. So now you stand before the Stoic mirror, not to blame, but to reflect. Ask yourself, am I reacting to her distance? Or am I creating my own inner space, regardless of what she does? Because here's the core of Stoic wisdom: you cannot control her reactions. You can only control your presence. The strength isn't in demanding her attention, it's in remaining whole even when she pulls away. And that quiet strength, rooted in self-awareness, is what makes you unshakable no matter the storm. There's a question you've never let yourself ask, buried so deep that even the thought of it feels like a betrayal. What if I'm not enough without her? It lingers there in the corners of your mind, the part of you that doubts your worth when she pulls back, when the connection shifts. You tell yourself it's just uncertainty, just a phase, but deep down, you know it's more. It's the quiet voice inside you, wondering if you're only valuable when someone else affirms you. And that's the question you've avoided, because to answer it would mean confronting the most uncomfortable truth: your value has been conditional. These unspoken questions don't die when you suppress them. They metastasize. They begin to shape everything you do, from the way you hold back to how you speak, how you act, how you measure your own worth. You've done it without realizing. You've adjusted yourself to the contours of what you think will be accepted. You've molded your energy, your humor, your presence into something that can fit her space, her rhythm, her needs. But in doing so, you've lost yourself. And the price? A quiet, knowing disconnection from the truth of who you are. The danger lies not in these questions themselves, but in your refusal to ask them. They create a prison of your own making. The more you try to avoid them, the more they control your behavior, pushing you to bend, to seek reassurance, to play along in a game that doesn't need rules. Stoicism teaches us that we can't control external events or people's reactions, but we can control how we respond to them. And the moment you stop chasing validation through other people's perception of you, you reclaim the one thing that never changes: your center. So ask yourself now, quietly but without fear, am I staying true to myself, or am I just trying to earn approval? Because the moment you step out of the shadow of your own doubts, you reclaim your presence. Not as a response to her, but as a statement to yourself: I am enough. And that's when real connection happens. When you stop pretending to be someone you think others want, and you simply become the person you were always meant to be: unshaken, unyielding, and finally, whole. There are moments when she pulls away, almost imperceptibly. A shift, a hesitation, a quiet distance that feels like 1,000 unspoken words. You might mistake it for confusion or even cruelty, but it's neither. It's protection. She's testing something you can't see, not her feelings for you, but her safety in this connection. Women don't play games out of malice. They test boundaries to see if the man beside her can remain unwavering while she lets herself be vulnerable, uncertain, messy. Psychologically, women's push-pull dynamics are born from an innate desire for emotional security. They need to know, before they fully let go, that the man beside them won't run when they show their cracks, their fears, their unpredictability. This isn't manipulation, this is instinct. When she moves away, it's not because she's not interested. It's because she's waiting to see if you can hold steady when everything inside her feels like it's shifting. Can you stay grounded while she tests the depth of her trust in you? A stoic man doesn't react with frustration or insecurity when faced with these shifts. He doesn't chase her when she withdraws. He doesn't panic when she becomes distant. He stays steady, unmoved by the emotional tides, not because he's cold, but because he understands that attraction isn't a constant current, it's a balance of tension and release. In that stillness, he doesn't ask her to open up. He simply remains open to her when she's ready, without fear, without need to force or fill the silence. He leads without trying, so the next time you feel her distance, pause. Don't react, don't chase. Just ask yourself, can I remain solid in my own center while she tests the edges of hers? The man who can be unmoved in the face of emotional unpredictability is the one who earns true respect. He doesn't seek validation in every shift. He understands that attraction lives in the space between the pull and the release, between the silence and the word. And when you stop trying to control her game, you stop playing in the first place. You simply become the space she needs to lean into. Reclaiming the frame isn't about shouting louder or trying to force things back into place. It's about quieting the noise, both the noise of the world around you and the noise inside you. The reactive man bends to every shift in energy, interpreting each silence as a threat or a request. But the man who leads, who stands firm in his value, doesn't panic when the space between them grows. He simply holds his ground. His presence doesn't depend on her approval. It's rooted in his own unshakable sense of self. A stoic man doesn't seek to control her behavior. He seeks only to control his own. When she tests, he doesn't react with frustration or eagerness to please. He doesn't collapse or beg for clarity. He simply observes. He holds space for her without folding under the weight of her uncertainty. And in that stillness, he becomes a mirror, reflecting the strength and certainty he already carries, not with pride, but with composure. His value isn't dependent on her mood. It's steady, it's constant, and it's his alone to claim. The difference is subtle. The reactive man performs, contorting his energy to meet her every whim. He gives too much, hoping she'll give back. The grounded man, however, doesn't give in to the pressure. He gives his presence not in the form of approval or sacrifice, but in the form of authenticity. His attention doesn't beg. His words don't seek validation. He doesn't act in haste. He lets her come to him if she chooses. And in that calm, he doesn't wait for her to define him. He defines himself. You don't need to be loved the way you think you want to be loved. The Stoics remind us that true freedom lies in detaching from external expectations. Marcus Aurelius said, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injustice." And in this context, the best return is not forcing her to change or act in a certain way, but remaining unmoved when she does. You don't need to prove your worthiness by being liked. You need to be respected for the man you already are, without hesitation. The moment you realize this is the moment you reclaim your frame. And once it's yours, no one can take it. And now, the dust settles. Not because everything is fixed, but because you've finally seen. The noise inside you has softened, and what's left is clarity. It's the stillness that comes when you stop trying to prove, when you stop chasing, when you stop over-analyzing her every move. You're not desperate to understand anymore, you simply are. And in that stillness, you realize everything you were looking for outside of yourself was already here, waiting to be found inside. The same glance that once made your heart race now holds no power over you. The same silence that used to leave you wondering now sits comfortably in your chest. There's no need for answers anymore, because you no longer define yourself by what others feel or what they don't. You stand like a tree in the storm, quietly, resolutely, untouched by the winds of uncertainty. And in that stillness, you discover a truth: you are enough, simply as you are. You remember the first moment, that initial flicker, the one you chased so desperately. Her attention, her approval, her smile, it all seemed so important back then. But now it feels like a distant echo, a fleeting moment. The man you are today doesn't need her gaze to exist in his full strength. He no longer waits for external validation to feel grounded. He is grounded regardless of what happens outside. And that is where the real power lies, within, not around. Marcus Aurelius once said, "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts." And now, you see, the quality of your thoughts isn't defined by her presence, her gaze, or her mood. It's defined by how you meet yourself in the stillness, how you stay grounded when the world moves around you. You don't need to chase affection, to bend, to perform. You need only to stand. And when you do, everything shifts, not because you're trying, but because you've stopped needing it. You began this journey believing that love, attraction, connection, these things were something you had to earn, to prove. You watched her reactions closely, adjusted yourself, shrank your truth, edited your words. The pull you felt wasn't just attraction, it was the desperate need to be seen, validated, chosen. You thought her gaze was the key to your worth, but you were wrong. The real shift happened when you realized it was never her gaze you were chasing, but your own reflection in it. There was a moment, quiet and invisible, when the performance stopped. Not because you forced it to, but because you finally understood her attention wasn't the validation you sought. The validation was already inside you, waiting to be remembered. You see now that love doesn't live in proving. It lives in presence, in being enough as you are. Not because someone else says it, but because you've stopped trying to be someone else just to fit in her picture of you. It's funny, isn't it, how the answer was always inside you. The same questions you once asked her, you now ask yourself. Am I enough without her? Can I stand on my own? You don't need her approval to stand tall. You don't need her presence to feel whole. You needed to learn how to stand in yourself first. And that's the journey, the quiet unfolding of the truth that you don't need to change to be loved. You only need to understand that your value is not in how you're seen, but in how you see yourself. So now you know. The pattern wasn't about her choices. It was about yours, and the real question isn't, did I lose her? It's, how do I stay with myself? The man who can stand unwavering, without the need to change for anyone, is the one who attracts respect, trust, and love, not because he needs to be needed, but because he has mastered the one thing most men never will, his own presence. And from that place, everything becomes clear. Now that you see it, the shift, the subtle erosion, the pattern you kept repeating, what will you do with it? This isn't just information. This is a choice. You've recognized the pattern of bending, of performing, of needing. But knowledge without action. It's a beautiful illusion that fades quickly. You've seen where it leads. The question is, will you choose to walk a different path, or will you repeat the cycle, staying trapped in the same loop, just with a new face, a new story? The choice is not about her, it's about you. The man who can break free from this cycle doesn't wait for the next shift, the next glance, the next test. He stands grounded in his own value. The question isn't, will she love me? It's, am I loving myself enough to stay true, regardless of her response? And that's where the power lies, not in her gaze, not in her approval, in your own unwavering center. Will you stay true to that center, even when the world tries to pull you out of it? Now, I'm asking you to take that step, to choose that clarity, that grounding. You don't need to change for someone else's approval. You need to reclaim your own presence. The work doesn't end here. It's just beginning. If you're ready to dive deeper into this journey of self-awareness, start by asking yourself the real questions. If you're ready for the next step, start by facing that silence without fear. Take the time to read, reflect, and remember who you really are. Don't let this moment slip, or you can choose to ignore it, to close the tab, scroll on, and let the echoes fade. But here's the thing, you've already felt it, the truth. That tiny spark inside you that says, you were never lost, you were just not paying attention. So make the choice, walk this path step by step. Let go of the need to prove, stand in your truth, and watch how everything around you begins to fall into place. Because when you stop chasing, everything finally begins to align. Before you leave this video, I want you to take one last moment. No distractions, no noise, just a quiet space to sit with yourself. Think about everything you've learned, every shift, every truth you've uncovered. But now, I ask you to go deeper. Can you sit in stillness for 5 minutes and face the question you've avoided for so long? What part of myself am I still trying to prove to the world? Don't rush the answer. Let it sink into the silence. Let it sit with you. This isn't a challenge of action. It's a challenge of being. Can you hold your center, unmoved by the world around you, unmoved by the need to be validated, even for just a moment? The Stoics understood this well. It's not about fighting what's outside of us. It's about maintaining inner composure, no matter what comes our way. And so, as you sit with that question, ask yourself, am I still seeking something external to feel whole? The answer will show you exactly where you're still being pulled. The real challenge is to face that discomfort, the silence, the tension, and remain still. Not with frustration, not with resignation, but with peace. Because every time you hold your ground, every time you choose to stay centered in the face of chaos, you make a small yet powerful shift inside. You no longer chase what isn't meant for you. You simply stand where you are, with clarity and purpose. And that, more than anything, is what makes you magnetic. No performance, no validation, just your unshakable presence. So here it is, your Stoic challenge. In the next moment of uncertainty, of emotional turbulence, do nothing. Don't react. Don't rush to fill the space. Don't seek the answer from others. Instead, sit with yourself, in silence, in stillness, and ask, who am I when I don't need anyone to define me? This is your opportunity, not to fix or change anything, but to simply be. And that simple act, when done consistently, will transform your life more than any quick fix ever could. Do you remember the first time you felt the shift? When her glance lingered just a bit too long, and you couldn't tell if it was curiosity or something deeper. It was subtle, but it struck you like a whisper you couldn't catch. Back then, you thought you were falling for her. But now, with everything you've learned, you understand that feeling wasn't about her. It was about you. It was the moment you began to question your own value, and that's the first place you lost yourself. But now, you're different. The question is, what will you do with that change? Maybe it's time to ask yourself a deeper question: am I willing to stop proving my worth and start living it? Because if you don't make that choice, you'll keep circling the same loop. You'll keep seeking validation through others instead of through yourself. That's not freedom. That's another performance. And the man who is truly free, the one who no longer needs anyone else's approval to feel whole, is the one who no longer needs to chase. He simply stands in stillness, in certainty. And if this video made you pause and rethink how you've been showing up, whether it's in love, in your career, or in your own life, then take this with you. The real transformation begins not in the loud moments of change, but in the quiet ones. The moments where you simply choose to stand still and breathe through the discomfort. Not because you're numb to it, but because you've learned to accept it. True strength doesn't deny emotions. It lets them come and go without being swept away by them. So, as you move forward, don't rush to fill the silence. Don't rush to make decisions from a place of fear. Instead, sit with the questions that have been unanswered for so long. And when the moment arrives, when you're faced with the decision to bend or stay grounded, remember this: you are enough, exactly as you are. The next step isn't in changing who you are to fit someone else's mold. It's in stepping into the full force of who you've always been, but were too afraid to own. This is your moment. Are you ready to take it?